With season 3 of Fargo wrapped up, I've decided to explore the core essence of the show itself. Its thematic aspirations, the ideas that underline and complement the story at large. While there are a number of themes that come to fruition through the story itself and the different characters' journeys, I think there are 3 primary themes that overlap and contribute to the moral of the story. Familiar versus the unfamiliar, self-determination versus divine intervention, and objective versus subjective truth, which are all interwoven to highlight the light at the end of the tunnel. That even in such a chaotic world filled with such bleakness and tragedy, there are moments of humanity and happiness that can diminish the effects of the evil frontier that is ever advancing. There are 2 distinct worlds in Fargo that are always in conflict, but also at the same time complement each other. The familiar world of the mundane, which is constantly at the peril of the chaotic and violent evil that corrupts and dilutes wherever it spreads. Fargo is, in essence, a story of these 2 worlds colliding. The mundane humanity is represented by the police officers in each season that deal with things that are familiar and relatable to the audience. Things like romantic interest, family tragedy, or a crisis of identity. These characters ground the audience in reality, in a world that would otherwise be susceptible to being engulfed by the surreal. The unfamiliar, on the other hand, is represented by the instigators of chaos, the criminals that operate beyond our knowledge and experience. Whether that's a wolf at the top of the food chain, seekers of empire and kinship, or the embodiment of human greed, they all leave a reckoning in their wake. But this isn't a simple tale of good versus evil, but instead a tale of a morally grey nature. The lines are blurred due to the corruption brought forth by these harbingers of doom. Characters such as Lester, Peggy and Emmett, among a few others, operate between these 2 worlds and as such represent both unfamiliar and familiar qualities. Lester, I think, is the best example of this. We understand his motivations, his frustration of always being at the bottom of the pack, but we as the audience become disgusted with his methods and selfish ambitions. It's even more interesting because Malvo effectively acts as a catalyst for his descent. One could argue that Lester always had dark intentions within him. He just needed a little push. And so this isn't a case of good to bad from one world to the next, but instead a world in which both can coexist. It is through this idea that Noel Hawley manages to explore fundamental questions pertaining to the human condition. It highlights above all else that humans are capable of both worlds, great kindness and great cruelty. There will always be those who bring great terror to the world, but there will also be those who think they can change it. Do we have control over our lives? Is our path laid out for us, or is there still time to change? Can life be characterized by coincidence and happenstance, or is there a higher power at play? These are all questions that Fargo presents to the audience through imposing surreal and supernatural elements. To this end, it suggests a certain control over the seemingly uncontrollable, a method to the madness. It does this through 3 key supernatural elements: the fish in the first season, the UFO in the second, and finally the mythical being of the Wandering Jew in the third. Fish are a recurring motif throughout the first season, perhaps foreshadowing the climactic scene that is used to instill both irony and justice. Irony in that Malvo uses Stavros' belief in God to trick and manipulate him into providing him with an immense amount of cash. But in the end, it's seemingly an act of God that results in his undoing through the death of his son. It's justice in that the audience is left to wonder whether this is some sort of cruel punishment from a higher power or a freak coincidence. In season 2, surreal elements take center stage, fittingly through the use of the UFO. The UFO begins the events that later spiral out of control and intervenes in the midst of the climactic fight at the end of the season, allowing Peggy and Ed to escape and Lou to live. The utilization of narration allows the audience to consider whether or not the events were manufactured by man's own hand, aka their lack of communication, or whether the many absurd coincidences are planned and orchestrated by a higher power, as they can decide who lives and who dies, offering perhaps a perverted sense of justice, one that the audience may not agree with. Life's not fair, after all. In season 3, there are a few ways one could interpret the mysterious man in the bowling alley, but since he's credited as Paul Marin, another name for the mythical being known as the Wandering Jew, a cursed entity by the hands of Jesus Christ, we'll interpret him as such. The role of the Wandering Jew in Fargo is to pass judgment. He sets Wrench and Nikki on a new path while forces Yuri to face his demons, which results in his demise. However, once again, this perverted sense of justice comes to the fold through Nikki's confrontation with Emmett, which leads to her own demise, and it's implied by the fact that she can't recite the words that the Wandering Jew gives her to bring down the unjust, that she walked the wrong path. She was not meant to bring Emmett's death and perhaps was meant to dispatch Varga instead, who is indeed the unjust. Was it just coincidence and the cat simply ran out of lives, or was it cosmic justice? The contradiction between self-determination and divine intervention complicates matters further and highlights that life is not fair. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes bad things happen to bad people. Wherever your belief lies, life is uncertain no matter what way you look at it. The dilution of reality is ever present in our postmodern world. Things are ever changing and evolving, and people's disparate perception of the world is no different. In Fargo, the subjectivity of truth and its evolution due to the postmodern era of technology is addressed mainly in Season 3, but the dilution of truth has always been present through the means of the statement, "This is a true story," which begins every new tale. The audience initially questions and is perhaps uncertain about whether or not the absurd story that they're watching with all these quirky and larger-than-life characters is plausible or possible. Noah Hawley and the Coen brothers are manipulators of truth. They present a lie in order to ground the surreal in some reality, to make the audience believe even for a second. Similarly, in Season 3, the subjectivity of truth, the concept that if one believes in something does that make it true, is explored through presenting characters with different perspectives and worldviews. For instance, Varga is the representation of the manipulation of truth. The idea that in a postmodern world where information is everywhere due to the advances in technology, the truth is whatever you want it to be. He believes in the worst of humanity and as such plays devil's advocate. Gloria, on the other hand, is the antithesis of Varga in that she believes in the best of people. She remains optimistic, perhaps with some naivety, as she doesn't utilize the grand amount of knowledge that is available through the great net. These opposing two truths come to a head in the final scene, with Varga in the darkness, distancing himself from reality, and Gloria with her optimistic smile, thinking that the world still has some good left in it. Noah Hawley smartly never tells the audience which truth is correct, and so the audience is left to make their own minds up about which camp they fall into. Moreover, a comparison between the first and last scene of the season highlights clearly this debate between objective and subjective truth. The first interrogation implies that those with authority and power can manipulate and distort the truth for their own propagandist ends. Power is synonymous with the truth. This is in direct contrast to the final scene, where there is doubt and uncertainty pertaining to both truths due to the fact that it's now a level playing field, where the postmodern world provides knowledge for everyone and not just those in power. The resolution of Fargo begs the audience to examine their own selves and the world around them. Are you an optimist or are you a skeptic? But I think you can also interpret the season as something akin to a commentary on how, even though in our postmodern world where misinformation is everywhere, the truth is still the truth. The individual in the East German scene is innocent no matter which way you spin it. VM Varga is guilty no matter which way you spin it. In a world filled with the dilution of truth and its mounting influence of subjectivity, objectivity might still have a place under all that noise. Alternative facts be damned. Nevertheless, this particular theme and the note the show chooses to end its last season is of particular richness, because there are so many ways to interpret and discuss it. Fargo leaves the audience with a myriad of ideas to ponder due to the complex array of themes that compound to provide a hefty amount of thematic resonance to linger in the viewer's mind. While there are other themes such as miscommunication, civilization against the wilderness, and self-identity, the world of Fargo is enriched through three key contradictions: the familiar world of kindness against the unfamiliar world of cruelty, the uncontrollable nature of self-determination versus the controlled nature of divine intervention, and the waning objective truth versus the mounting subjective truth. These themes are layered throughout the show to indicate that while men can be evil, life may not be fair, and the truth can and will be manipulated against those with innocent and pure hearts, there is still good in the world despite all the evil. At its heart, Fargo is an optimistic tale. Life can seem like a burden, but at least you can take solace in the little things.